Meghan recently spent several days in the country. Her husband still calls home. Yet throughout the entire visit, she somehow managed to avoid every camera in sight. There wasn't a single photo outside a doorway, no wave through a car window, and not even a grainy paparazzi image snapped from across the street. The kind of photos that usually seem to find royals whether they're looking for them or not. The kind that have captured nearly every other member of this family at some point during a visit to the UK, no matter how carefully their security arrangements were planned.
This is the actual audio of the boos that the Harkles received.
For someone whose entire public career, across every project she's pursued since stepping away from the royal family, has been built around being seen through carefully selected angles, flattering lighting, tightly controlled moments, and produced content intentionally crafted to shape exactly how the audience perceives her, this wasn't simply bad luck. It was a plan carried out with a level of discipline that's worth paying attention to on its own. And when you begin putting everything surrounding this particular trip together, one piece at a time, you start to see exactly what she may have been preparing herself for all along.
Everyone is asking the same question. What changed? Because for years we heard that the obstacle that was standing between Harry, Meghan, and these children was the UK thing around security.
2. Let's begin with what has actually been confirmed by multiple sources before moving into the theories and speculations surrounding this visit, because I think it's important to keep those two categories clearly separate throughout this entire discussion. Harry and Meghan reportedly brought Archie and Lilibet with them to the UK during this trip. Charles and Camilla met with the family at Highgrove for what the palace described only as a private occasion. No photographs were released to the media, and no statement was issued beyond the simple confirmation that the meeting had taken place. According to reports, the children arrived separately from Meghan rather than the entire family entering together through the same door at the same time. That's an unusual and largely unexplained detail that's worth pausing on by itself before we even begin looking at the different theories.
Meghan Markle to return to the UK, that's an admission of professional defeat. That's an admission of we need help, in my opinion.
Reports suggest Harry had only seen his father in person a handful of times over the previous 2.5 years, which is a significant amount of time for any father dealing with a serious health condition. So, regardless of what else this visit may ultimately represent, beneath all the theories and speculation, that reunion between a father and his son stands as a genuinely human moment that deserves to be acknowledged on its own, separate from everything else surrounding it. What still hasn't been fully or convincingly explained, however, is how Meghan managed to stay completely out of sight for the entire multi-day visit. And I think that's the part of this story that deserves more careful attention instead of being quickly overshadowed by the warmer and more emotionally comforting Highgrove reunion narrative. There's one theory that I think is worth stating openly and considering seriously because, at least for now, it seems more convincing than the alternatives. More convincing than simply blaming scheduling conflicts or extra caution. Some royal watchers believe she wasn't avoiding cameras because she was uncomfortable or because there was nothing meaningful to photograph. They believe she stayed out of view because she had carefully calculated what would happen the moment she stepped back in front of a camera and concluded that every possible outcome would work against her.
You talk about a woman bringing the ghetto into the royal family. This right here is on full display ghetto, what is happening.
Think about what she would actually be stepping back into if she appeared in public, even for a brief moment during this visit. This is someone who has spent years consistently arguing that the UK is not a safe place for her family. It wasn't just a single remark made during an interview. It became a prolonged legal battle that eventually reached the courts over the level of security she and Harry believed they should receive as private citizens who once carried official royal responsibilities. Now consider the position that leaves her in. If she were to appear publicly and the response from the crowd was warm and welcoming, it would quietly weaken years of the argument she has made about requiring additional protection in the first place. After all, a friendly and supportive crowd isn't the kind of situation that appears to justify extensive security measures. On the other hand, if the reaction were cold, openly hostile, or visibly negative in any way, those images would become lasting footage. They would follow her into every future headline involving the royal family, replayed repeatedly, clipped, shared, and resurfaced for years to come.
Well, we are as well, to see if they'll come on stage and show themselves, but I doubt it. I really don't think so. I mean, the trip has really been a train wreck, as Kinsey says, and I don't know if Meghan wants herself associated with this massive loss. I mean, how can we trust anything Harry ever says again, including what he says about his family, if he's been proven to have basically put falsehoods to the court?
There really doesn't seem to be a version of appearing in public right now that ends clearly in her favor. Whichever way the crowd's reaction might go, if that is the position she finds herself in, and I think the available evidence increasingly points in that direction, then the most logical decision, perhaps the only one that avoids both unfavorable outcomes at the same time, is straightforward: don't appear at all. If she never steps into public view, neither scenario ever has the opportunity to unfold. Some believe that if she had appeared publicly in the UK, the possibility of a hostile reaction was exactly what she had been preparing for, perhaps even on a level similar to what some of the more pessimistic commentators have long predicted Harry himself could face. That isn't because anything like that was confirmed beforehand. No one can confirm a crowd's reaction before it actually happens. Rather, it's because many commentators had been publicly predicting that possibility for months, well before this particular visit was ever announced. Based on the available behavioral evidence, she appears to have acted like someone who took those predictions seriously, instead of simply brushing them aside. One brand and reputation management expert even made the point weeks before this visit took place. According to that assessment, a cool reception, or even audible boos from a crowd, was a genuine possibility if she appeared somewhere where emotions were already running especially high, as they clearly were during that particular week. No one is claiming with certainty that such a reaction definitely would have happened had she appeared. What many people are arguing, however, is that the possibility itself may have been enough to explain why she chose not to remain in public long enough to find out either way.
We know Meghan was adamant that she was staying put in California, would never ever put a foot back onto English soil again unless someone was going to put a crown on her head. Maybe that's what she thinks is going to happen in the future. But things have changed. Right, we have to go back a little bit back in time with this, Mark, to explain it. But Meghan and Harry's American dream, their Californian dream, hasn't worked out, hasn't gone to plan.
Stick with me here, because the timing of this visit makes the entire theory far more compelling than it would be if it existed on its own, disconnected from everything else happening during that same period. This trip took place in the very same week Harry lost his privacy lawsuit against the publisher of the Daily Mail. It was a genuine court defeat, decided by a judge after a full hearing, with reports placing the combined legal costs for both sides at around £50 million. After leaving the courthouse, Harry described the ruling as a complete and obvious whitewash. Those were his exact words, not mine. And they're worth repeating because they reveal a level of frustration from someone who rarely speaks that directly in public. Had Meghan stepped into public view during that exact week, she would have been entering an atmosphere already charged by a very public and very recent legal loss, while her husband's comments about the court were still dominating headlines. If the theory that she was preparing for a hostile reception has any merit at all, and I think it deserves more consideration than much of the casual coverage has given it, then this may have been one of the worst possible weeks in years to test the mood of the public firsthand. So it's perhaps no surprise, and possibly by deliberate design, that she chose not to. Another line of thinking suggests there may have been a broader strategy at work, rebuilding goodwill with the king because there could come a time when that relationship becomes important again. There's also a financial aspect to the story that very few people have connected directly to the discussion about avoiding public appearances. I think it's worth addressing carefully because some of what follows has been reported by credible sources, while other parts remain unconfirmed speculation that has yet to be fully verified. Harry was in the UK during the same period for Invictus Games Foundation events. Reports from several sources have suggested the foundation has lost some major sponsors over recent seasons, potentially creating additional pressure around fundraising and donation requirements connected to certain UK-based grants that support part of its funding. If those reports are accurate, then a high-profile Sussex appearance could carry measurable financial value by increasing public attention, donor visibility, and renewed interest in the foundation. That raises a question that's uncomfortable but worth considering. At this stage of their public lives, are decisions about appearing or deliberately choosing not to appear ever purely personal anymore? Or is there always another calculation quietly running underneath, weighing which version of events creates more headlines and which headlines ultimately generate more donations, attention, or revenue for whichever project currently needs visibility? Commentators have also pointed out that this legal defeat followed an earlier setback. In January 2024, Harry withdrew his legal action against the publishers of the Mail on Sunday regarding coverage connected to his request for armed police protection. After dropping that case, he was ordered to pay substantial legal costs. Because of that, some argue this wasn't unfamiliar territory for him. I'm not going to pretend I know the definitive answer to any of those questions, because I genuinely don't. And presenting certainty where none exists would be unfair to you as a viewer. I also don't believe anyone outside their immediate inner circle truly knows the full picture, regardless of how confidently some commentators present their own theories as settled fact. If you'd like updates as the story develops instead of discovering them days later through short clips with misleading captions, that's exactly why subscribing to this channel can be useful. It's not just a routine sign-off. It's a practical way to keep up with a story that's evolving much faster than most. Some commentators have even suggested Meghan prefers not to remain publicly visible when Harry is facing difficult moments. They point to previous examples, such as the period surrounding the release of Spare, when Harry was promoting the book while facing heavy criticism, and Meghan largely stayed out of sight. They make similar observations about other legal setbacks and interviews, arguing that she has often been noticeably absent during those periods. Another theory, which I think deserves more attention than it's received in much of the coverage, is that Harry and Meghan may not have been entirely aligned on the purpose of this trip in the first place. If true, it would help explain several of the inconsistencies people have noticed from the beginning of the visit. According to this theory, Harry genuinely wants his children to maintain a connection with their grandfather and with their wider family heritage, especially given his father's ongoing health challenges and the growing sense of urgency surrounding that situation. While Meghan may have considerably less interest at this stage of her life and career in maintaining a close connection to the institution itself. If that interpretation is correct, it explains the repeated pattern we've seen during recent UK visits. The constant cycle of they're coming, they're not coming, far more convincingly than simple scheduling issues or logistical complications ever could. It would also help explain why Harry spent the week fully visible, attending events, speaking with the public, and appearing before cameras, while Meghan spent that very same period completely out of sight, making no appearances and offering no public comment. In that sense, it almost looks like two people following two very different versions of what was officially presented as the same family visit. On paper, it was one shared trip, yet their actions suggest two entirely separate priorities operating beneath the surface. There's another comparison that I think deserves more attention because it's often overlooked in favor of a much easier and arguably much lazier one. Whenever this family dominates the headlines, many people immediately compare Meghan to Diana, whether that comparison genuinely fits the circumstances or simply serves as an emotionally charged historical parallel that attracts attention. A far more useful comparison this week, however, is Meghan alongside Harry during the exact same 7-day period. Harry walked into a courtroom in full public view. He lost the case publicly, made a pointed and widely quoted remark as he left the courthouse, and allowed the entire experience to unfold in front of waiting cameras. His reputation may have taken a blow, but he faced the moment openly. If the theory surrounding Meghan's absence holds true, then she entered that very same week facing many of the same public pressures and made certain there was simply nothing for cameras to capture. No images, no unexpected appearances, no opportunity for a single moment to become tomorrow's headline. One of them absorbed a public setback in full view of the country. The other removed the possibility of taking a public hit altogether by ensuring there was nothing available to record. Whether you see that approach as disciplined, strategically smart, or quietly revealing about where things now stand probably depends on how much patience you personally have left for either of them at this stage of the story. There have also been unverified claims circulating that certain Invictus-related funds may previously have been used to cover personal expenses, with wardrobe costs among the allegations. I want to be completely clear about the status of those claims. They remain allegations, not established facts. As far as I'm aware, they have not been confirmed through any independent audit or formal investigation. If they ultimately prove to be untrue, presenting them as settled fact would be unfair to everyone involved. Even so, they have become part of the wider conversation surrounding this visit simply because they've circulated widely enough to attract public attention, regardless of whether they eventually withstand scrutiny. And if any part of those allegations were ever shown to contain some truth, it would provide another practical reason why Meghan, specifically, might have preferred to stay completely away from cameras during this particular week. Because any new photograph taken now wouldn't be viewed in isolation as simply Meghan visiting the UK for a family event. Instead, it would immediately be interpreted alongside every unresolved question and every lingering controversy that has accumulated around the story over the years. Others believe her absence wasn't driven primarily by concern over a hostile public reaction at all, but by something much more calculated, controlling the narrative itself. Under that theory, remaining entirely out of sight now ensures that whenever images or footage eventually do appear, they do so on her own terms, at a time and in a format she has chosen, rather than through an unexpected phone video captured by chance on an ordinary day. There are also reports suggesting Harry may visit Althorpe House, the Spencer family's ancestral estate, ahead of the 30th anniversary of Diana's death, reportedly to gather footage connected to a documentary project believed to be in development. Charles Spencer has publicly acknowledged media interest surrounding the possibility of such a visit. If a documentary is indeed part of the broader purpose behind this trip, then it changes how much of the rest of the story can be interpreted. The unusually low profile, the separate arrivals, and Meghan's complete absence from every available camera frame could all take on a different meaning. Rather than random circumstances, they could simply represent footage and public visibility being carefully managed until the right release date and the right commercial opportunity arrive. Footage captured over several days that are currently being presented to the public as personal, private, and entirely unplanned. The truth is, those two explanations, concern about a hostile public reaction and carefully managing material for a future documentary, don't have to compete with one another. Both can easily be true at the same time. And I think that overlap is exactly why this visit refuses to fit neatly into any single explanation. no matter how hard commentators try to simplify it. She could have been avoiding the possibility of a negative crowd response while also controlling the timing of future documentary footage, and, at the same time, quietly disagreeing with Harry about the real purpose of the trip itself. Those three possibilities aren't mutually exclusive. They can all operate simultaneously, each contributing to the exact same visible outcome. Nothing. No photographs released, no public appearances, no comments given to the press. When only one theory attempts to explain an absence like this, it's simply an educated guess. But when several separate and largely unrelated theories all independently predict the exact same empty space in the public record, that absence begins to look far less like coincidence and much more like the most efficient outcome available to her, regardless of which explanation ultimately proves to be the closest to the truth once more information emerges. If you've noticed a detail in this story that hasn't yet been discussed on a panel show or covered by the major outlets, leave it in the comments below. More than once throughout this ongoing story, some of the sharpest observations have actually come from viewers connecting dates, events, or small details long before professional reporters identified the same pattern. So, where does that leave us after considering all three theories? Especially since none of them necessarily cancel each other out. At some point, the theory about avoiding a hostile crowd has to be tested against future events rather than the single visit alone. If that explanation is correct, then we should probably expect her to continue avoiding public appearances in the UK for as long as the broader security argument remains central to ongoing legal proceedings. One relaxed public appearance met with a warm reception could undermine years of carefully developed legal positioning in just a few seconds of footage shared across the internet. We may also continue seeing visits that appear similarly unbalanced from the outside. Harry attending events openly and publicly, while Meghan remains somewhere entirely out of view. If two people genuinely have different ideas about the purpose of a trip, that difference is likely to keep producing visits that never seem to fit together cleanly, regardless of how carefully future joint statements attempt to present a unified picture. Once every theory and every piece of speculation is stripped away, what's actually confirmed is fairly straightforward. Harry traveled to the UK, lost a costly and highly public legal case, made a pointed remark to reporters outside the courthouse, and experienced every stage of that story in full view of the public. Meghan either came to the UK or didn't, depending on which reports you consider most reliable, but whichever version is ultimately correct, she left behind virtually no visual record for cameras to capture at any point during the visit. In a family where public image has, for decades and across generations, been shaped by what is photographed just as much as what isn't, becoming the one person to leave an entire multi-day trip without a single confirmed public image is significant. It doesn't feel like simple chance, and it certainly doesn't look like ordinary bad timing. Perhaps it really was concern over how a hostile public reception might affect years of legal arguments. Perhaps it was a calculated decision tied to controlling documentary footage and its future value. Or perhaps, and if I had to choose just one explanation, this is the one I'd lean toward. It was both factors working together, each reinforcing the other, with neither one fully explaining the whole story by itself. So, what do you think? Was Meghan's complete absence from every camera during this visit mainly driven by concern over a hostile public reception, by a carefully planned media strategy, or by something entirely different that none of us have considered yet? Share your own theory in the comments below. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss the next update as soon as the story develops. I'll see you in the next one.